Let's move on. Don McNair says, I had a good discussion with some Stratosphere Loungers the other day on this subject, which I struggle to fully understand, and it would be good to get your comments on it. How would you reform the welfare system in a free market economy? How would it work? What would be the best way to deliver the service? Would it all be delivered by private charities? And if so, how would that be better than the government? How would you ensure that those that genuinely needed help got it? Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Don. That's a great question. There's a lot of things here, and none of them are going to be in any particular order, but if you just record all the verbiage that I'm about to throw at you and then get an editor, it might make some sense. First of all, we have to understand a couple things here. And one of the first thing we have to understand when we're talking about welfare reform is that this is people's livelihoods. And if we don't make it clear to them that this is not about throwing them in the street, then they're going to fight for their lives. And that's not a metaphor. They're going to fight for their lives because it will be their lives. I don't know if there's a stronger opponent to what the government has done to entire generations of people of all races in the last 40 or 50 years. I find it absolutely disgusting. It's not just disgraceful, it's that. And it's not just wasteful, it's that too. It's morally disgusting what the Democrats have done as part of a strategy to keep people dependent on them. But there it is. Now, we have to start from that premise. In other words, we have, if we look at welfare and entitlements as they exist in America today, and I almost said today, I really meant to say prior to November 6th because things are moving rather quickly. If you look at the current entitlement system, it's probably best, Don, to start from thinking about this is a house that people live in, and it's a ghetto. It's a rickety, filthy, urine-smelling, rat-infested public works project entitlements. That's what it is. It's a structure, let's say, and it's disgusting and it's disgraceful and it's got to go. And our first impulse when we see something that really horrible, with the wires torn out of the walls to sell for scrap electricity, get a hit of, speedball or something, and when you think of how appalling it is, and filthy it is, and immoral it is, our first inclinations want to go down there and just knock that building down. But the problem is there are people living in that building, and we can't just go knock the building down. We can't knock the building down. We can't destroy welfare and entitlements as they exist today until we get people out of the building. Now, I know that seems like a contradiction, like the whole purpose is to get people out of the building, but you've got to get them out before you destroy the building. You can't destroy the building in order to get them out because people will panic. And look, as I said, I think my record on entitlements is pretty clear, but if I was on entitlements and somebody said, we're going to turn off your money, good luck, I'd panic too. I'd fight for my life because that would be my livelihood. So that's not only not smart, it's not fair. Despite the moral rot and the horrible crime, which in every case is a decision. You make a decision to hurt somebody. Despite all of the horrible toxicity of these communities, the fact is, while they took the aid, and while many people think, well, they could have bootstrapped themselves out of it, I don't buy that anymore. I used to, but I don't. Most of the people on welfare and entitlements today were born into a system. I know this sounds very progressive, but it's not. It's just the truth. They're born into a system that is so utterly backwards in terms of incentive and in terms of humanity and the fundamental qualities of being alive and being an independent human being, thanks to our friends, the Democrats and the progressives. It's that they're stuck there and they can't get out, and it's not their fault. They were literally born into this. It's like being born into slavery. You can't really very well, say to somebody, well, you're a slave. You should rise up and break your chains. What would they know about freedom? They've been born slaves. They're slaves their whole lives. That's what we're dealing with here. So first thing we got to do, Don, is we got to understand before we knock this horrible thing down, we got to find some temporary housing for these people, and the end goal would be to have them all living in nice little single-family houses with little gardens and white picket fences, and that's my goal for everybody in this country. I want them to be happy, and I want them to be free, and I want them to be the masters of their own destiny. If we don't start there, we're going to be in trouble, and we probably deserve it. So now where does that leave us? Well, the first thing we can do is we can do the easy things. We can grab the low-hanging fruit. when Bill Clinton was forced by the Republican Congress to do the Welfare Reform Act. I want to say it was 94, it might have been a little, but mid-90s. Basically, that legislation said that we're going to do more means testing. We're not just going to hand people checks. We're going to do a little bit of a background check and see if they went to work. And we're going to make it a little bit more difficult. And the progressives howled that if you do this, we will see starving mothers on the street offering their children up for sale and, and eating their pets, and their pet food and all the rest of it. It's going to be an absolute human catastrophe if we cut even one dime of it or make it just the slightest bit more difficult to get a welfare check. Then it's the end of the world. And passed anyway. And what we found was by making the standards a little bit higher, by making it a little bit more means tested. In other words, do you deserve this handout? Are you looking for a job? Forget about whether or not the jobs were looked for. When they instituted those new criteria, something like, unless memory deceives me, something like 40% of the people on assistance just dropped off assistance because it was now too much trouble for them. It used to be literally free money, and I mean that literally. I literally mean literally. I don't figuratively mean literally. I literally mean literally that they would go down and they would pick up a check for free money, and who wouldn't do that? If you didn't know the poison of it, if you didn't know how bad it was for you, everybody would do it. So when we found out that instead of saying, hey, you don't get a check unless you're working or anything or looking for a job, we just said, you're going to have to show that you're looking for a job. And something like 40% of the total people on public assistance just didn't show up the next day because now it's too much trouble. Okay, that's where we start. We start with the low-hanging fruit. We means test people. At this point, I'm going to take a brief moral aside and mention something I've talked about before, and I think it was Stefan Molyneux who pointed this out to me. Not that I wasn't aware of it, of course, because needless to say, I already was. But he did make the point, and he's absolutely right. Back in Victorian times, you may say that was maybe the strictest, tightest civilization in modern history. People that study civilization as, just as a structure, say you're going to have to go a long way into the past to find a more robust, confident civilization than the Victorians, despite their many flaws. And Stefan pointed out that in Victorian times, there was a very clear distinction, very clear, between what was called the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. And the Victorians had it figured more or less like this. If you're a woman and you've got 4 or 5 kids, and you have 4 or 5 kids and were never married, and these children are a result of your desire to go out there and do what you want to do and to hell with the consequences, then you were considered to be undeserving poor. In other words, yes, you're poor, and yes, you're in terrible crisis, and that's nobody's fault but your own. You should have thought about this before you had all these affairs and had all these children. Now, 180 degrees contrary to that was the idea that that exact same woman with 5 children could have been married to a coal miner or the lowest of the low. And let's say that she was married to a private or a corporal in the British Army, and he goes off to Natal or someplace like that, or Afghanistan, and ends up getting killed. Now that woman, same woman, let's say, and the same 5 children, same situation, flat out broke, all of a sudden that person became a member of the deserving poor because her husband was killed fighting for Queen and Empire, and it was beyond her control. It wasn't a decision that she made. It was something noble, and that the society owed her a living because of the sacrifices that she had made and that the family had made on behalf of the common good. So when they had anybody who met the criteria of the deserving poor, people for whom it was impossible to do any kind of work, for whatever reason, they made allowances for that. And then they had private charities, and I don't think they exactly, I think it's P.J. O'Rourke who said, we have a moral. The Bible tells us we have to clothe the poor. It doesn't say we have to style them. So these people were taken care of privately. So after we, do the means testing thing, we have to go a little deeper and find out who's deserving, who's not. And if you're not deserving, then you have a shorter time clock, I think, than you do if you are. But the fact of the matter is this: we have incentivized and subsidized this catastrophe. These murderous inner cities with these horrific crime rates, 3 or 4 people being shot every day, ultra-violent young male predators driving up and down the streets, walking up and down the streets, would kill you for a dime and wouldn't think twice about it. All of that horror and all of that nightmare and helplessness and hopelessness and violence and all the rest, all of the crime that goes into paying for your drug habit, all of it. It's ours because we ordered it, we asked for it, and then we paid for it. It's a FedEx delivery of what we were asking for. And we got it. If you're paying single mothers more money every time they have a child out of wedlock, then that's what you're going to get. We've submitted the order to the factory, and the factory took our money, and they made the payment, and now we're getting the product that we asked for. And until we change the incentive structure of all this, then we're going to just keep doing this because people are going to do what's in their economic interest, just like you and I do. So if you're a poor single mother and you have no skills and no one has ever implanted in your mind the idea of independence and work as a way out of poverty, then you're going to get a check. And the more kids you have, the more money you get. What do you expect is going to happen in a situation like that? So those incentives have to be moved. But I really do think it's going to be done. I think it's going to be generational triage. I really do. I think that in the same, and I think about the debt the same way. The debt and the entitlement thing is so big. The problem is so big, and it's been festering for so long that I think it's not only not possible, but I think it's a terrible waste of limited effort, resources, and time to try and turn around the Titanic of people that have already grown up on entitlements. And I think the answer is to go straight for the lifeboats, and that would be people who are so young that they have no memory of entitlement checks, and you're basically starting with fresh clay. I would start to incentivize methods for younger people and get to them early. Now, the simplest thing you can do for them is you can get them an education. And we all know that the progressives have teachers' unions in order to make sure that no one gets an education. The important thing is not how many people graduate or what percentage of the students can read or what percentage of them actually finish their grades or what percentage of them are given social C's to pass or what percentage of them eventually go on to get jobs and what percentage of them eventually go on to commit murders and then get murdered themselves. They don't care. What matters is that the teachers cannot be paid less. And in fact, they must be paid more every year, and they can also not be fired. That's what you see. That's the evidence. You may not like it. If you're a member of a teachers union and you think they're great, that's fine. They're great for you, but they're bad for the kids. So when you hear Donald Trump say something like, we want to offer choice, competition, imagine, competition and choice in education. He's got it. He's on the answer. Because as much as it sounds like a liberal talking point, education is the way out. But you can't just throw education at people, and you can't just throw all these benefits at people, and you can't just do that, because if you have an unlimited spigot of money and you just keep throwing it at the problem, you're going to get people whose job is not to solve the problem, but just to keep taking the money. So, Betsy DeVos, you want to ask how do you get people off of welfare? How do you get people off of entitlement? You start with an education secretary like Betsy DeVos, who understands that the only way for these people to get an education, to get out of the violence and the crime, and have some hope for an economic future, which means getting off of this subsistence, that's how you get started. Listen, this is going to be the kind of thing that's going to undoubtedly surface and make me even more popular among the left, but you can make the case that by subsidizing this, by pumping money into these communities without accountability, that what you've got is you have a population that is unsustainably large and would not have been that large without subsidies. For example, you got people living in the desert. Hey, baby. People living in the desert and they're starving, and so relief comes, which is the right thing to do, and the decent thing to do is to help people when they're in genuine need like that. So they send over gigantic packages of food, and the people stop starving, and then they keep having kids, and what you find is we're putting more and more aid into an area that cannot support that many people. The next thing you know, your aid has caused the population of that area to grow way beyond what the land can support. You could kind of make the case that's what's going on with entitlements, especially in our inner cities, that when you're giving women more money, the more kids they have, they're having more children than the economy could support. There's just not that many opportunities. And if there wasn't all of this entitlement, they wouldn't have as many kids because the market would be working on them. But when you get free money, you screw up everything. So I know I'm going on and on about this, but I think really just to make sure that we're clear on this is you would want to get the easy people off the rolls. You would want to make it clear. And finally, look, I go on for days about this, Don, and I know I think I pretty much made my point about 20 minutes ago. But you also have to do a little bit of advertising here and a little bit of salesmanship, and that's what Donald Trump is actually rather good at. You have to do some salesmanship and some advertising. And what I mean by that is you have to, before you can expect people to get off of entitlements, you have to convince them that it's a good idea. Not that it's the right thing to do, because they don't care about whether it's the right thing to do. And it's not their fault. You're talking about their survival. You can't just say, hey, you know what, it'd be good if you got to work and got off of the welfare rolls. You can't even say you'd feel better if you did that, because they don't know. They have nothing to compare it to. So when I talk about advertising and marketing this idea, what you've got to do is you've got to go into these communities and you have to convince people that everything that they want in life, even if it's just bling, is available by working hard and not the other way around. You're not going to get it for free. If you can have it, but you're going to have to do this. And I think all of the things that follow. Here's another bingo hit for you. Last thing I'll say about this, ding. To see whether or not this works, whether it can work or not, the first public speaking I think I ever did was, I want to say 2009 or 2010 up in Utah. I did Utah Valley University and Southern Utah University, 2 Mormon schools, and I got a tour of the is it Welfare Square, something like that. It's the Mormon community assistance thing, and what I saw there was people, hey. What I saw there was people who had created a food canning factory, and poor people would come in, and instead of getting a handout, the Mormons gave them a job. One of the guys on the line pointed out to me, yeah, we could get a machine that could put these caps on these preserved jars much faster than these people do, but if we put that machine on there, we'd get more jars out, but these people wouldn't have a job. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to show them that having a job is better. And the reason that the Mormons impressed me so much was because I thought they understood it absolutely right. They basically said, if you come to us for assistance, you're going to get a job. We know you don't know how to do anything, but we're going to help you with that. But you're going to put in 8 hours of work, and we're going to help you learn how to do this very simple job. And then we're going to help you learn how to cook things like rice and chicken at home and so on. But the main thing is, the critical thing is, it's not going to be assistance. It's not going to be a handout. You're going to put in 8 hours, and maybe it's 8 hours of mopping a floor, but it's 8 hours of work. And when you're done, the money you get is not a handout. It's a paycheck, and it's yours. And I watched him do it, and I thought it was absolutely unbelievable, the support. I know I've mentioned this before. There's another code word for you. But if you really want to get rid of poverty, you have to disperse poor people. You have to disperse them out into the population. Because if you keep them all together, all they learn is how to be poor and how to be violent and how to do drugs and how to take entitlements and how to cheat the system. They don't know any better. And how would they know better? They've got no way of knowing better. You need to disperse that kind of poverty out into the general population, where instead of surrounded by people who leave trash in the hallways, they're surrounded by people who clean up after themselves. And they won't start cleaning up, but sooner or later it will become clear to them that that's how you behave. Not lectured, they'll just do it because that's how everybody else does it. That's what social proof does. Anyway, long answer, but it's a great question. There you go.